YouTube, Dawson Rider here. We just wrapped up our I'm already off to a great start. Our sixth Reiwa Era series. I guess we just started our seventh one, so I'm not too far off from stupid. I don't even know what that means. Anyway, we just wrapped up Gavv, so I thought it would be a fun opportunity for me to procrastinate my video where I read your opinions on Gavv, because I have to do reading on camera, and do a ranking of all the Reiwa Era series so far. Just keep in mind, as always with these videos, this is just my personal list. I'm sure I'll get comments being like, I can't believe you placed Revice there, like I edited somehow like the master list. So just keep in mind, this is my opinion. Without further ado though, let's get started. Starting off at the bottom of the list, you all knew it was coming. Gotchard. If you're familiar with this channel at all, you know that I'm not the biggest fan of the series, which is a shame because I was very excited going into it. You know, I love almost everything about the aesthetic. It's got some great designs. I love the concept of the chemis. You know, there was definitely some ideas in the series that I really quite liked, especially the Daybreak stuff. Like, I'm a sucker for a future version of a character coming in story, and the movie one, it wasn't so bad with that character, and the older version of Hotaro was actually pretty cool, but this series was just such a letdown. Like, in general, even though there was some potentially cool ideas in here, when it played out, it felt like they ran like an AI program of like generic writer stories that happen, and then that's the whole storyline. And also, of course, there's Hotaro, who I almost feel bad for how much I rag on this guy, you know, because it's not the actor's fault, but unfortunately my soul is trapped in the cage with Michael and Lucifer, so I don't care. I hate this guy, not the actor, and he's fine. I'm sure he's fine, but he's just so miscast. I feel like no matter what character he was playing, I would be annoyed by him, but I feel like he would be much better suited to be one of the alchemy students. Like, I could totally buy him as one of the side characters that kind of gives inspiration to the main character to love chemis. I think that would have been better suited, because he just doesn't pull off badass. You know, you have characters that present more like a badass character. I just said character so much then, but, you know, much like a badass like Decade or recently Geats. You know, they look like a badass. And then you have characters that look a little more twerpy, but most other twerpy characters can pull off the badass. Like even Sogo, who weighs like a pound. Like when he would get serious, I could at least sort of take him seriously. It's not like it was a total transformation where I'm like, oh my god, where did this guy come from? But I could take him seriously as like a leader and as a protagonist, but whenever Hotaro like tried to be stern and badass, it was simultaneously laughable and it also made his face more punchable. So I feel like I'm just talking about like why I hate Hotaro instead of the series, but overall, it was just not for me. And if you've watched any of my other content, you know, so I'm just going to move on before this turns into another Gotchard rant. Following that up, probably controversial, and I want to say here that Gotchard is the only series in the Reiwa era that I have any sort of truly full negative feelings towards. Overall, I think the rest of them have been, you know, solid or solid-ish. Like, none of them were overly negative, and that's why the next one is 01. This is one I do want to revisit, because of course I have the Blu-rays now, and I feel like it might rank higher, or at the very least I will like it more when I just kind of relax and watch it without having to think about making a video. I mean, I probably would make a video later, like, I rewatched 01 or something like that, but in general, I feel like this is still not a bad series at all. I have my mixed feelings on certain things about it, why I think it's not as good as others do, but my personal reasons are just why it's held back a little bit. I mean, I really liked the first half. They had me in the first half, not gonna lie. Like, the first half through the first arc, when they had the mystery and stuff going on, I thought it was really well paced. I was locked in by the mystery. I also love the designs of the series. I love the progrise keys. I love the sounds of the progrise keys and the voice. I actually quite like Aruto as a good example of this sort of classic modern writer protagonist that's more silly and lighthearted, but it's very charming. Like, even though I fundamentally disagree with his support of Humagears, I understood why he loved them, which I hate to bring it back to Gotchard. I swear I'm not going to bring up Gotchard in every one of these rankings, but probably most of them. But just talking about, you know, getting to understand the character's POV with Hotaro, that was another big negative, is I never understood why he loved the chemis. It's like, these puppets keep singing about how they're friends. I'm starting not to believe them. And I felt like it was tell not show, whereas I fully understood why Aruto was so committed to Humagears. His sort of bad joke bits were funny. I feel bad that I can't remember her name, but the robot chick, the chemistry and the bond between them was well done. But really, it was just the second half that lost me. You know, you had that fillery feeling arc, which I feel is a funny arc, just looking at it now in modern times, where it was like, let's prove these robots are better at humans at their jobs. And I just felt it turned into a very generic AI storyline. You know, we've all seen Terminator, and there have been hundreds of AI-type storylines about Terminators and robots, whether it's they're going to kill us or robots are people too. And I just wasn't here for another story lecturing me about why my can opener is a person. And I just was not for that. There was some cool stuff there, but it just turned into something generic. I don't hate this series, it just kind of fell off for me. Now, probably controversial, to have this series above 0-1 or anywhere not near the bottom, maybe even below Gotchard for some, is Saber. Because I totally understand why people don't like the series. I think it's a good example, though, of I think almost everything you can find something positive in it. I feel like nowadays modern criticism is either three categories. It's masterpiece, dog shit, or the middle category, which is not it was okay. It was masterpiece, but then people turned on it because fans are just miserable today. But Saber definitely is a lower end series, and I totally understand why. I think the first half, really, I struggled with it. I even dropped off of it, which is why I wound up binging it later, which is when I had a positive experience. But it felt so generic and rushed, and they had that whole storyline about Toma being betrayed, or not Toma being betrayed, but Toma betraying them, and it was played up like we had been with these characters a long time and were invested in their bond, but I'm like, we've only been told they're friends for 5 episodes. This just doesn't work. And it has one of the weakest casts. I think for me, the weakest overall Rider cast is Gotchard. I gotta keep bringing it up. But that was a series where the only characters I really only kind of liked was Valvarad and his one friend, the lady friend. She was a good actress. And then this series is probably my second where I didn't really like the cast all that much. It wasn't as much of a hatred or disinterest. I just didn't click with them. I think the only character I really liked was Espada, and what I'm going to call is Saber's Kamen Rider guy. I can't remember this dude's name. Kamen Rider Thrust, this version, because he was a good dad. That was his whole character. He was a good dad. But for me, my positives came in with the series when I binged it, because I was not following the Rider stuff at that time, so I didn't know about the scans or the news or the new forms, so it was kind of exciting to be like, oh my god, there's a new Rider debuting this episode. This is a cool form and twist, because I didn't know anything. And I think the main strength of this series for me was the lore. I really liked the lore in the world. I think it had pretty good pacing once you got in the second half of the series. And even though I wasn't a big fan of the cast, I really was locked in for the story. And I think the overall main positive was at the end too, the messages about what stories mean to people. And I think that really resonated with me. So it was a series I kind of had a soft spot for because I feel like everyone ragged on it. And I felt like I was one of the only ones seeing some special stuff in it. Now, following that up with our most recent entry, Kamen Rider Gavv. And this one might raise in the ranks. It's very early days. It's only a week or so after the series has ended. And there have been series that have been more recent that eventually moved up in my ranks in both my Sentai and Rider rankings, because I think that it says a lot about how it sits with you. There's series like King Oger, for example. I really loved King Oger. But I don't feel like the further I get away from it, my fondness moves up for it or anything like that. Not like I'm not fond of it, but there's been other series like Build, one of my favorites. I had some mixed feelings about the end, so I'm like, I don't know if this is going to raise or lower, but the farther I got away from it, my negatives melted away, and that rose up higher. But for this series, right now, it's just too recent to say, but I could totally see this moving up to the second place. But for now, the only thing that really holds it back is the lackluster final half. And it's really strange because usually you have a really strong final arc or a really weak final arc or a weak final arc that's very mixed and rushed like Revice's. But this was just the first time I've ever experienced a lackluster arc. Gavv was incredibly consistent through the Suga reveal. And then after that, it wasn't like it took a nosedive. I mean, there certainly was some things I think they mishandled with the villain characterization and pacing, but it wasn't like, oh man, this really dipped in quality. It was just so meh. It was just so weird. And I think it's the missed potential of the villains, the missed potential of Suga especially, and the weird meh ending that holds it back. But otherwise, it was an incredibly consistent series with a well thought out lore, great action, one of the best casts, probably my favorite ensemble of core 3-4 characters since Build, in terms of really feeling the bond and being connected with those characters. So I'm always going to have a soft spot for this one, and I could totally see it raising in the ranks. We'll see in a year or two or whenever when I do another Rider ranking. But for right now, I had to put it here. Probably controversial to put it above it for some people, because I've seen some generally mixed feelings on Revice. I feel like I don't fully have my finger on the pulse on what the group think on this is supposed to be, but I do see people not being so pleased with it. But I have kind of I always use this phrase too much, but a soft spot for it. I have a fondness for this series. I stopped watching it around when Veil showed up, and it wasn't because I wasn't feeling the series so much, I just wasn't in a toku mood overall. And I went back to it after Geats, and it took me a minute to lock in, because what I loved about Geats, which you could probably already tell is number one, thanks, spoiler alert, was how different it was. Watching Toku all these years, you can get tired of the rinse and repeat formula. And I love that Geats was such a refresh, but then Revice was much more in line. I don't want to say Revice didn't have unique things. It wasn't as formulaic as Gotchard, but it definitely was of the more classic Rider flavor, so it took me a minute to get back in the rhythm. Oddly enough, they had a perfectly timed clip show that really caught me up, because I was almost like, should I just rewatch the whole thing? Thankfully, I didn't have to do that. And once I got into it, it definitely was messy. Like, the end arc especially, it felt like that meme about how the Lord of the Rings movies have, like, 5 endings. Like, we just kept ending. Like, we'd have an arc where I'm like, this really feels like the end. And oh no, they're still going to keep going. And I feel like that could have been better paced, and especially with the stuff with, like, George. I feel like the opposite I do about Suga, whereas Suga, I'm like, you should have kept him in the show. We could have had a whole really great arc after we got some reveals. But with George, I'm like, there could have been a much better V-Cinema. We did get a George V-Cinema, but it wasn't that good in my opinion. I think it was just a vehicle to give one of the other villains a Rider form. But there could have been a really cool V-Cinema about George and his dad. Instead, it was like all sprinkled throughout like the movie and stuff, and then the weird rushed final arc. But even though it was mixed at the end, for me the strengths of the series weighed out, which was the family dynamic, one of the best family dynamics I've seen in Toku. They actually feel like a family. I think they fleshed that out well. I think that was helped by the fact that in the first arc, we just had time to spend with them before like shit hit the fan. And then also the themes about demons and how everyone has their own demons and they deal with them differently. That was so well done in terms of like the different types of anxieties represented, how people deal with those anxieties and demons represented through the different demons, where I think that like kids will just see it as like it's their fun demon pal, but if they revisit it later it has a lot deeper themes, and I think that was really well done and I really appreciated that. And I also really liked the finale. It was a really bittersweet finale. I miss when Rider endings felt unique, because, you know, in the past, Sentai always ended on, like, oh, let's wrap it up in a bow. And then Rider always had a weird ending that kind of left you thinking. It maybe felt incomplete, and sometimes it wasn't so satisfying, but I appreciated that was unique. And Rider more and more has become a lot like Sentai with the formula and the tied in a bow endings. And I like that we had an ending that felt unique again. And they didn't even ruin it when they digged it up for the, I think it was the Geats movie, when they brought Revice back. They didn't fully revive Vice. It was very briefly. I appreciated that. And I liked that it was unique in that we just had them fighting each other in this sort of celebration of their friendship, which was the core of the series, or one of the cores of the series. And it wasn't just a fight against a big bad or an evil Rider. I saw people bringing up that they appreciated that the final villain of Gavv was not an evil Rider. And I'm like, you forget, Revice didn't do that either. I mean, yes, you had George, but the final battle was this nice little personal thing. So I have a soft spot for this series. There's the word soft spot again, or words, that's 2 words. Number 1, though, Kamen Rider Geats. Like I mentioned, kind of talking about it during Revice, this was just nice because of it being a little bit more non-traditional in the formula. Like, there's, of course, certain formulaic things in Rider. You're always going to have certain tropes, you know, certain times when, like, oh, the final form has to come in because they got to sell the toy. But in general, the structure of the series was well done. I really liked the characters, their different motivations and desires. It ended a little bit cliche, like even though we got a different protagonist than the usual kind of specialist boy. Well, I guess Geats kind of was a specialist boy, but you know what I mean. Like a Toma, Aruto, Gavv type of character. We got a badass, which was refreshing, but it still wound up being that same, like, oh, all hail the main character's point of view type of thing, which annoyed me. But still, this series was just so much fun to watch. I really loved some of the concepts. I think the thing that I loved most about it was like the concept of the Watchers, and it being like a game show people from the future were watching, and like the different motivation of the Watcher villains. I thought that was really fascinating. Like, even though the series wasn't perfect, it was very unique, and I really enjoyed that. And it was a breath of fresh air that allowed me to like be reminded what I like about Rider and Toku, while also showing me like, hey, they can still evolve and do new things, and it's not always the same formula. And it's really funny thinking about it because I see mixed feelings on Gavv as well, or Geats as well, especially near the ending. I think some of the most mixed feelings towards any Rider series or Sentai series comes at the ending. And now I'm thinking about it, Rider especially is kind of like American Horror Story, where even if it's a really strong series, it can kind of fumble it at the end or almost fumble it. But the whole thing is it doesn't ruin the experience for me. That is the way it was with Geats. Like, it wasn't perfect, especially near the end, but I'm always going to be very fond of this series for bringing me back into Rider. Alright guys, and that was just my list. Feel free to share your ranking in the comments as always. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell to get notifications for all my videos. Dawson Rider, signing out.